Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. If you look after your car, it'll tend to run better for longer. Perhaps in a sort of revelation that shouldn't come as a great surprise, if you look after your body, it's also going to tend to run better for longer. Now, first up, there are no absolute guarantees in life about anything whatsoever. It's always about shifting the dial and trying to improve your odds and making things as good as they can be, recognising that it is still, to use the proverbial term, possible to be struck by lightning. But we see with vintage cars, for example, if they've been maintained, if people are putting the right fuel in the tank, if the tyres are pumped, if it's polished, if it's tuned, all the basics with looking after a car, it's probably going to last a lot longer than if it's trashed. Lifestyle interventions improve cognition in adults who are older at risk of cognitive decline. So cognitive decline, greater risk of dementia. Interventions such as healthy diet, social engagement, exercise or physical activity, and looking after your cardiovascular health. I'm not sure this really comes as a great surprise. They've done a trial and they've found what, again, could come under this as obvious category, but look, they've done it, so good on them. Research suggests that dementia risk could fall by 45% if a number of risk factors were modified at various stages of life. And they're talking about 14 here. I'm not going to list them all out. We'll put the link in the description as usual. But most of these are going to revolve around the basics of looking after your health. So it is about having less processed food, less sugary food, good quality fats, not eating too much, drinking water, not smoking, not drinking too much alcohol, getting some regular exercise. But the key ones in this: physical activity, cognitive activity, healthy diet, and social engagement. And many years ago, I wrote a book called the Dr. Joe's DIY Health, and there were 8 pillars of health. And amongst those, 4 of them were diet or fuels that you put into your body, physical activity, social engagement, connections, and also sleep and relaxation. And I haven't mentioned sleep in this, but there's a lot of separate work that's been shown that getting enough sleep is useful as well. There's also been shown, and this is another one of these, another one of these findings that comes as a bit of a surprise, but really there's no reason why it should come as a surprise in terms of using your brain. Your body stays in better shape if you exercise it. You move your body. You might lift some weights. You might do, some stretching or various forms of exercise. But the concept of, if you lose it if you don't use it is one that people are familiar with in terms of physical fitness. And we know that people get deconditioned if they're not physically active, and that if they are physically active, that they maintain better muscle mass, better bone health, cardiovascular. The list does go on. If we don't use our cars, they're not going to run quite so well either. If you leave it in the garage for 2 years and try to start it up, look, it might start, but it could be problematic, and it probably wouldn't run that smoothly. We also need to use our brains. And people who, this has been shown, who continue to do some sort of work, and it doesn't matter whether it's paid work or voluntary work, seem to have lower risks or rates of dementia, and this has been shown in a number of countries. But it doesn't have to be work. It can be doing crossword puzzles. It can be reading articles or books or different magazines, newspapers. Maybe not newspapers these days, probably going to do it online, but reading anything, and this can also now be listening to or watching that which you're not familiar with. So you're reading an article or listening to a podcast on a topic that you're not that familiar with. So you actually have to maybe listen a little bit harder, but more importantly, think about what you're reading or hearing. And the brain doesn't necessarily grow in size as we get older. No, it doesn't happen. But we can lay down at any age new neural pathways. So these are the connections within the nervous system, where certain nerve cells connect to certain others. And whenever we learn something new, either a new habit or a new way of doing things or a new piece of information, we lay down new neural connections and pathways because they haven't been there before, because we haven't done it before, we haven't thought about it before. And we also know that the more, and this is perhaps more in a physical sense, if we're looking to master some skill, the more we practice it, the better we get at it. If we are wanting to learn a new subject, then the more we read about it and the more we revise it, typically the better we're going to do in terms of understanding it. And if it were to come to an exam, maybe better in that exam. Because it's working the brain in the same way you can work your fitness. If you want to improve your game of tennis, you've got to get out and practice it. But you also need to do some fitness work separately to that, and it comes as no surprise. With the brain, it's not as obvious. You can see if somebody's got themselves into shape, if perhaps they weren't. It's not always apparent, but it can be. You're not going to see that, if you like, with the brain, because obviously it's inside the skull. We can't see it, not with the naked eye. But we can notice a difference if we do make those changes. As usual, the basics do tend to get overlooked. And as we've spoken before on the podcast, for those who've been listening, and thank you to those who are listeners, and if you're new, welcome aboard. Thanks for listening today. Basics which don't have a patent and which can't be taxed or banned at the other end don't get a lot of publicity because, and you know what I'm going to say next for those who are familiar, there's no money in it. So there's no, whole of government program that academics can recommend and get paid for if you just want to eat more sensibly or do a little bit of regular exercise or catch up with your friends. And social connection is the other aspect that probably we'll do a whole separate podcast on some point, because loneliness is a factor in all-cause mortality. It's estimated to be the equivalent of 15 cigarettes a day. Again, don't know exactly how they work these out, but we do know, and it's been shown repeatedly, that loneliness and social isolation are factors, yes, in dementia and also all-cause mortality. And that's not always as easy to solve, although it is possible to sort of look to, tend your network or, and sometimes it is making that first step of getting involved perhaps with a group of people who have a similar interest to you. So people say, well, I don't know, how can I make new friends? The start point can be going to a class or group or activity that you're interested in, and other people are going to be there who necessarily going to share that interest. But the basics of going for a walk, a bike ride, a swim, going to a gym, again, depending upon how more recently you've done exercise, very important to start at a level that's applicable and appropriate. And for some people, yes, you might need to go to your doctor first. Eating sensibly, getting back to the basics of eating like our ancestors did, less of the processed, foods, less of that which gets, 3 or 5 elephant stamps from the government. Not smoking should sort of go without say. And exercising the brain. And there's a whole lot of different ways of doing that. Just finding something each day, trying to learn something new each day. And we can all manage to learn something new each day. So it's those very, very simple 101, not expensive measures that we can do ourselves that don't guarantee that one can never develop dementia later in life, but we can certainly significantly lower the likelihoods. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.